Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I am a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you enjoy these live streams, I'd like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, where we do deep dives into some of the best art books around. You can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. You also get access to an online archive of my comic books so you can read them digitally, and a Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share works in progress, critiques, feedback, art tools, general shop talk, and more. So head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy and become a member. If you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, if you'd like to get work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net and you can pick up one of my books. Like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It is a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can also pick up my most recent comic book series, Morning Star, which is a retelling of Lucifer's Fall from Heaven as a Western. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4, and Volume 2 contains a conclusion to the series, issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter, script excerpts, thumbnails and page layouts, character designs, and photo reference. I basically show you how I put the entire comic together. So you can check all those out at amazon.jeremy.net. And if you want to see what's inside the books before you pick them up, you can go to the homepage of my YouTube channel, and there are book flip-throughs. You can see what's inside the books. And there are links to all these in the description for the video. And if you're watching on Twitch, there are links on the About tab. Okay, so let's see. I see Omar is already in the chat. Excited. So excited. Happy to hear that you're excited. All right. Well, let's have some fun, make some art here. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. So I was going through my files and I found an illustration that I've been working on a couple months ago. And for some reason, I stopped midstream. So this is an illustration that's coming out of a class I was taking with the instructor, Carl Ganas. I took a composition class that he was teaching. And he has signups for his next semester of classes now at figuredrawingschool.com. So definitely go check that out. I highly recommend him. But anyway, this piece was one that I was working on. I decided instead of just doing the homework assignments, why not use ideas I had for illustrations as things for homework? So it just helped me working on something I would be working on anyway. And this is it's Medusa sitting on a throne made of statues surrounded by the other Greek gods. You've got like Athena wrapped around her, Mars looking over her shoulder, Mercury, Zeus is the one that's on the bottom, Demeter, Poseidon in the front, Apollo playing his lyre. Or actually, no, I guess the one looking over his shoulder is supposed to be Pluto. It's been a while since I've looked at this because Mars is the one holding the sword up top. Anyway, point being, I've got this piece. No, I don't want to change any of the hidden layers. And I had started doing color studies. So let me go back out here. So I started doing a bunch of different color studies to try and figure out what I wanted to do with this color-wise. And for some reason, I did not get very far. I think this is as far as I got. But at the same time, if I go back out here, there's another one. And I'm not sure what the plan was or what the thinking was with this other piece here. It's just another thumbnail grid. Maybe this was the original thumbnail that I was working on. Okay, that's what it is. This was me working on it at a thumbnail level before I blew it up to a large size. Let's go back over here. So really the stage that I'm at is just trying to figure out what I want to do with the colors. So I've just got like a grid of the same piece in multiple different color forms. And I guess the starting point was simply working with just trying to figure out what my base overall color was. Something with, reds versus, warm colors versus cool colors. And I'll tell you, looking at this right now, none of these, I didn't mean to create a new layer. None of these really speak to me. Like, none of these really feel like, oh, this is the one. I mean, if I had to, like, say absolutely, like, what is the closest, it would probably be this cool with the warm one. This cool, this cool blue with a light warm, with, just warm skin tones. But even that doesn't really feel like it's capturing it. What I want to do instead is take these two layers, group them, hide that group, duplicate that group. And now with the second one, instead, I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to take the layer with the artwork and change this to multiply. And I'm going to do, I was trying to set it where I was doing overlay with colors on top. And the reason for that is because when you do multiply, everything gradually gets darker and darker and muddier. But I just want to see what happens if I switch approaches and then paint underneath. It immediately gives me something that's more muted, but that muted color palette seems to immediately, it was already desaturated, but this really knocks it back even more. Well, that's just to say only the bottoms were desaturated. The bottom ones, like if I turn this off, turn off the background color, the only thing that's desaturated are the lower ones. The top one was like full, bright, vivid. Let's see what happens if I change this to normal. So now it gets very muddy and very dark. And sometimes that's the exploration process. The exploration process is, going very muddy and very dark. But the fact of the matter is that now the really saturated ones are kind of like the base color to start with. So let's see here. Omar says, hey, how you doing? I'm saying how you doing. He says, hey, I'm saying how you doing. Good to see you, Omar. Thanks for making it to the stream. See Mercidian Merchant here too. How you doing? Thanks for popping in. Always good to see you. So this particular stream is not going to be super like watching me get a bunch of dynamic artwork done. This is a lot more about thinking and decision making. So this is going to be a lot of staring at things, turning layers on and off, adding a few bits and pieces here and there. But I will tell you the starting point is that I need to make all of these different color squares the bright color level that the top one is. So I can just drop that in there. Drop that in there. Whoops. Color over the edges. Because this is so, switching it to multiply makes the thing so dark, the composition so dark, that I need to have something super bright underneath and then go only brighter from there. I can't go darker. And that was the reason why I created a whole new group, because changing this to multiply and making all these colors really bright, I want to have the flexibility to go back and forth between this version and the other version just to explore color and value. Let's see here. Mercidian Merchant says, doing good. Just commissioned my next original character. Great. Happy to hear it. Byron's in the chat. Says, hey, people. Hey, Byron. Good to see you too. Glad everybody's getting productive stuff done. So I will tell you that I'm going to start in the center with the blue. And the other thing that's interesting about this is that immediately by putting the layers on multiply, everything inside this image is darker than what the original artwork looks like, because there is no white in this composition at all. The absolute lightest color is that shaft of light, which, as you can see, is still gray. And even my background isn't white. My background is gray. So this is definitely a darker composition than I normally do. But I wanted to start with values that that really resonated with me and then work from there. So I'm going to start with this blue. And from here, I'm going to go not completely gray, but really gray that down. And let's see what happens if we go so that it's a very muted version. I'm going to go even more. I'm going to go so that it's so pale that it's hardly distinguishable from the original gray. So if I turn this off, it's like gray, blue tint, gray, blue tint. So it's very, very cool. And that said, given that how dark this composition is, I'm going to go a little bit lighter. How gray and how light can I make this? I think I can go a little bit darker, actually. So I'm going to have this shaft of light raking across. So I'm going to start with that light, which I don't want to be full on yellow. I don't want it to be full on orange. I want it to be kind of golden. And even with this, we're going to make it light and pale. Because what I'm really trying to do is, through most of my life, my approach has tended to be very vivid colors and working just in terms of the contrast of light and darks. And I am trying to get a little bit more sophisticated these days and work in using saturation in addition to value. So saturation isn't the main thing that I'm using to focus the eye. But yes, having yellow rake across a cool blue draws attention, draws the eye. But if I pick places where it goes from like kind of a pale yellowy color to like really, really bright, vivid, In fact, looking at this tells me I should move this to a little more orangey, a little more golden, only so that the go a little bit further. No, I want to leave that there. If I decide that this gives me some place to go in terms of both warmth and saturation for drawing the attention. So this color is already warm, but let's say that within this color, I want to make things really pop. You zoom in a little bit more so you guys can see. And mind you, when we get close, you can see that it's pixelated because it's a big field full of these. And I'm just going to keep working. I'm going to work this one until I feel like, all right, I don't know what else to do. And then I'm going to jump to a different color and try something else. So this process is very much, my thumbnailing process is just like my drawing thumbnailing process. It's just intuitive, just trying stuff and moving around until I find something that works. What was I gonna say? Oh, so let's say that I want to go really saturated. I can draw attention by taking the current color and then making something that really stands out in terms of saturation. Or I can also go saturated and let me do the saturation. So I can go saturated, but also go warmer, go to full on yellow. So even within this, I could paint a highlight inside of that area with a color that is, and just go full yellow. So you can see within this already kind of bright area, by going more saturated and warmer, it gives me a place where I can put highlights even within light colors. So those are things that I can use to kind of focus the eye. And this is something that I have not done in work in the past, and I'm trying to experiment with now, here with you guys. Because this whole creative journey, this whole process is just experiment after experiment, trying different things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. Now, the simple thing is I could just say, all right, I've established my light source as this light raking behind her. And now I can just take everything. Although that said, I was about to just say, all right, I'm going to use that as the light for everything. But what probably makes sense is to cool this down. And the question then becomes, if the color I want to go to is blue, what's going to look better? This is something I actually learned from watching a class. I think it was in Schoolism. But the idea of, instead of going around the color wheel, so if you look at the color wheel that I have up top, I can't zoom in on it, but right now it's in the oranges. So you see this up here? And the idea that I'd heard that no one had ever explained to me before was, you normally think, all right, if I want to go warm, I go towards reds. I want to go cool, I go towards blues. But what someone showed me, and I was like, wow, that really does work, is instead of cooling it down by going all the way around into greens, into teal, and then into kind of an electric blue and sky blue, into darker blues, instead of going all the way around the color wheel like that it is actually, go back to this color, it's actually quicker to go gray. Because gray is, if you see my circle now moving in here, that the one that's controlling the tone, the value and the saturation, that if you would actually jump across, that's like the most direct line towards a blue. So if you want something to be cool, that you could also get that cool color. You can take the existing color and desaturating it, making it closer to gray, can get the same effect, can get a better effect of feeling like it's approaching the cool color that you want. And that's true for anything that's opposite of the color wheel. Like if you were on green and you wanted to get to red, instead of saying, oh, well, red's a cooler color, I'm just going to move to the oranges, you might get a better effect by just going gray. So I am going to see what happens if I just put some gray in here. And I probably should not put too much gray in here, given that this is already kind of a desaturated color. So as an experiment here, I'm going to put in this really gray color. This desaturated version. And then up here with Mercury, Hermes, I am going to come in with I'm going to go back to that original color. And this time I'm going to go to a slightly green color and see how that works. And I feel a little bit weird talking about color theory, only in the fact that I think I've mentioned many, many times that color is probably one of my weakest areas. I mean, that's the reason why I was, taking schoolism classes specifically on color, because, it's important to lean into your strengths. It's also important to work on your weaknesses. And I don't want to get too caught up in this because, mind you, this is a thumbnail. This is a color thumbnail. Everything I'm doing right now, I'm going to have to redo for the final piece. But my whole point in just wanting to do that was to kind of try and decide what feels better to me. The green or the really grayed down. I remember when I said this was just going to be a lot of me looking at stuff, making decisions. I can see a world where the green works. Paul Pate's in the chat. Hey, Paul, how you doing? Great cartoonist and illustrator. Also popping by to say hi. Yeah, he says, I know zero about color too. Want to take some classes as well. I took a class. I signed up for schoolism, and basically schoolism, it's kind of like Netflix in that they've got kind of an all-you-can-eat. Once you subscribe for a yearly subscription, you take as many classes as you want. The stuff I learned, I think it was from an illustrator named Nico Lockerstern, and he had an introduction to Procreate. And I've been using Procreate for years, but I wanted to take the introduction class because I thought to myself, maybe there's a whole lot of features that I've never used that I could unlock just by sitting down and starting with the basics. And I definitely learned a lot of stuff. I took his class. I took a class with Oh God, why can't I remember his name? He's like one of the best concept artists. Craig Mullins. Yeah, he had a class, a digital painting course. It just kind of showed his approach to digital painting. That course was amazing. Um, I've been meaning to take Nathan Fowkes has a few different courses there. And I live this way. I love Nathan Fowkes' charcoal portrait painting book. I've got that book. That one's fantastic. But he has a couple classes on composition. I think he's got one on color. He's got a workout. That's what I'm going to dive into next. But I think in terms of learning color, like I have James Gurney's Color and Light book, and it's a great book. It's also very much a deep dive unto itself. And it almost feels like having the schoolism courses are like small bite-sized chunks that I can take on, as opposed to taking on something massive. I'm going to try repainting this now with the green and see if that does anything for me. Because when I first started painting this, I was thinking, when I painted in those gold-ish colors, I was like, nah, that's it for me. That really works. This is tough because part of me really wants to lean into the desaturated nature of my underpaintings. Like almost like what happens if I use as little color as possible? Hmm. The interesting thing about using this method where I'm coloring on a layer that has a artwork above it on multiply is that it totally messes up the eyedropper, because when I'm eyedropping, I'm not just picking the color that's on the screen. I mean, remember this way, I'm not picking the color that I'm using. Like if I wanted to eyedrop right now, I have to turn off the layer with the artwork, and I can see that that's a much lighter color than what's underneath because I've got that gray layer on top. So it does add a little bit more extra mechanics to this thing. So let's see here. Paul asks, have you heard of the 70-20-10 rule for color? I'm guessing on those numbers. I need to read about it more. I have not. So feel free to drop the knowledge in the chat. I know that there's another painter that I follow, a watercolor painter named Mark Taro Holmes. And he has a thing called, what is it? Tea, honey, and I forget what the last beverage is, but it's like, I think it's similar to the idea you're talking about where like your first basic colors are very, very light, and desaturated, and that you save the potent stuff for kind of like the last tiny bit, which sounds kind of like 70, 2010. But also, I'm not working from a specific color approach right now. And that may be part of the reason why this piece is still trying to figure out I'm still trying to figure out how to take shape with this piece. Like I said, color is not really my strong suit. So really with every piece I do, I'm kind of figuring out how I want to approach it. That's too light. Let's go back to this and then just push it back towards blue. But anyway, what I was saying was that after a certain number of years of working in color, I presume most artists develop just an approach of like, I start with these base colors, I build this way. I know Marco Bucci, he's another guy who teaches color, and specifically the approach that I'm going through, he would not recommend. Like, he definitely does not recommend starting with grayscale and then coloring a piece. That said, generally speaking, when I'm working, value is my happy place. Black and white is where I feel like, oh, I've got this thing working, doing what I want it to do. And it's when I start adding colors that things start going sideways and get wonky. And I think, I watched a video specifically where he talks about the whole coloring black and white pieces. And he said that the choices that you make when you're working from black and white and coloring a piece are not the same as if you're just observing color directly or just working intuitively. The things will be, you don't necessarily have to use oversaturated colors, but the color mixing you will get will be more vivid when you do mix colors or lay colors on top of each other. And seeing the results of his demo, I'm like, I agree with what he's saying, but things just feel off when I try that approach. And that's what has led me to continue playing with the grayscale. And right now, this is actually starting to feel just gradually closer to what I was hoping or thinking. Just giving the sky a little bit of value change, cooler at the top, warmer at the bottom. It's already starting to work for me. Now, Byron says, if I remember correctly, it's the ratio of how prevalent, this is the 70-20-10. He said the ratio of how prevalent a color is. One color is your main, another is your secondary, and third is for detailing. That way your palette stays more cohesive. All right, that's good to know. Paul says, my limited understanding, 70, same thing. 70% of the same colors on your picture, 20 slightly different, 10% for high contrast. This is right on, Byron. And James says, looks like a God ray or something. That's a cool, who knows? Maybe God ray is what I should call this piece. It's definitely Greek mythology. It's Greek gods, but it's Medusa kind of in her, I imagine her, like her throne is like this she's got like a palace of crumbling statues of men that she's turned to stone. And then Paul says, I definitely have an approach. You can use an improvement, but it's an approach. Yeah, you can say the same about mine. And to be honest, that's sometimes, here's the thing. My whole approach in terms of like sharing my work live streaming is that I don't want to come off as a guru. I kind of want to show the ugly part of making art where you don't know what you're doing and where a piece is going. Because I feel like when we're alone at the tablet or at the drawing table, you know, we can feel like it's real easy to feel like, you know what, I'm a fraud. I have no idea what I'm doing. Other people seem like they have all their shit together, and I'm just, I'm just a hack, and I'm going to get found out. Where the truth is, I think most of us are just, we've got a little bit that we know and that we're good at, and the rest of it, we're just fumbling around in the dark. And that little bit that we're actually good at, that's the thing that people mostly key into on our work. And they aren't really sitting there like just looking to criticize or give us crap about the things that we're weak at. But in order to get to the good stuff, we have to go through this really ugly phase on almost every piece. And I guess I'm willing to stand up and take the hit and say, look, I'm making really, really ugly things on the road to trying to get to something good. That's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to share and make it okay that we're in the ugly state, that we're in the ugly stage. I'm just like, this is how I get to something good, is a lot of crappy stuff. And maybe by showing that crappy stage isn't such a scary thing and saying, hey, we can be in that stage together and get through it and get to something good. Maybe it'll make other people feel less anxious about that when they're struggling with their work. Because I'm not freaking out and flailing, but this is the struggle phase. This is the ugly phase of a piece where I don't know how to make it into, I don't even have a clear picture in my mind, which that's another thing. Normally, when I have a clear picture in my mind of what the color is supposed to be, I dive right in. I maybe make one or two color thumbnails just to make sure that what I'm going to do is going to work. And I might do like one other variant just to say, well, what happens if I go in this direction? But for the most part, I just dive in and start making stuff when I have a clear picture. When I was making this piece, the entire time I've been making it, it's been black and white in my head. It hasn't been in color. So now adding some color, that's one of the reasons why I'm also looking at what happens if I strip away most of the color and make it just slightly tinted. That's another possible approach. And the whole point of doing these thumbnails is that if I don't have a clear picture in my mind, well, then I better make a clear picture in my mind of what I want the colors to be before I go to the final piece at like full resolution. Otherwise, I'm just gonna be sitting there paint. It's gonna take me 5 times as long to figure out what it's gonna be if I just start painting versus just doing these little color studies. So let's see here. So James says, and by the way, people watching in the chat, since I'm streaming on multiple platforms, there's people on Facebook, you don't necessarily see the comments of people on YouTube. People on YouTube don't see the comments from people on Twitch. So that's part of the reason why I read them out. So anyway, James over on Facebook says, having recently watched The Hills Have Eyes, the 2000 movie, I was experimenting with deformed characters. Some of my drawings were a bit scrabbly, but that might be due to an art block issue. Anyway, I don't know if you've played with deformed characters, but I'm just thinking about organic shapes and integrating those. I'm sure I'll come across some disturbing reference material, but if any great ideas of what reference would be helpful, that would be great. Deformed characters and reference for deformed characters. Oh, I've never looked into that. I'll tell you something. This is going to get real gross real quick. But instead of looking at people with deformities, maybe try looking up surgeries and looking up organs and looking up photographs of intestines or livers or micro like not microscopic. Is it laparoscopic surgery? Any surgery where you're looking from inside the body and looking around. And instead of looking at the outside, it's not necessarily about people having deformed organs, but looking at just flesh and organic material and veins, but not put together in the way that we're used to, because we're not used to seeing ourselves from the outside in. That might be an interesting way right there to find some to spark some creativity, but don't do it right after you had a meal. So that's one suggestion. And hey, if anybody else in the chat has some thoughts, feel free to throw them out there. Let's see here. Byron says, let's be crappy together. Let us be crappy together. That'll be the mantra for my channel. Let us be crappy together. And then James says, yeah, says, I don't know if you have any ideas. Let's see here. Maybe people can see comments from different platforms, because Byron says horror movies are a great source, especially for 80s grindhouse. So, all right, yeah, you know what, guys, let me know. Are you able to see in the chats from different platforms like Facebook and Twitch? Can you guys all see like all of the chats? Because I always thought that you could only see the chat, the comments from the people on the platform that you're on. But I could be wrong about that, which is nice to know. So I'm not sitting here spouting off like an idiot. Let's see here. James says, yeah, and the people who were exposed to Agent Orange. Ooh, yeah, I'm not sure what the deformations are. I know that there are, I mean, this gets really sad, but also thalidomide was a drug that was prescribed, I want to say in like the 50s to the 70s. That it was prescribed as a sedative for women. And it causes deformations and birth defects, and a lot of women were having deformed children. So maybe looking up thalidomide babies. And don't ask me to spell thalidomide. You're gonna have to Google it and trial and error until you get it right. I can't spell it. I ain't gonna try and tell you I can spell it. I can't spell it. I can barely pronounce it. But that is another thing that you could look at. Leper colonies. I mean, that's what you should do. Is you should start a list. So let's see. Byron says, I can't see comments from other platforms, only when you put them on the stream. However, James says, I can see the YouTube comments. So it's not a two-way street. This is interesting. Yeah, Paul says the same thing. I can only see the YouTube chat. And Paul says, we met a child of thalidomide in Chicago. No thumbs. Well, I mean, from the horror stories I've heard, being born with just no thumbs, as much as that sucks, that sounds like getting away, that sounds like getting off lucky compared to like kids with partial heads or additional heads or just no arms whatsoever. I've heard some wild stuff, but let's see here. So James says, okay, I use Google for most reference stuff. And James, it looks like you are the one, you're the lucky winner. You get to see everybody's chats, but but not everyone can see yours. But well, then good. I will continue to throw them up on the screen and make sure that that you guys can all hear at least what's going on in the conversation. But yeah, James, maybe have a running list of things to look at. Thalidomide babies, leper colonies, internal organs, just a whole, just start a running list of subjects to search that might have deformations on them. But I mean, that sounds like some dark, creepy stuff you got going on there, in a good way. I like dark and creepy. All right. So I decided, this is the other thing about the thumbnailing. So I said that I kind of got this one already. This is far from a finished color thumbnail. It just has an overall tone and a light source, but still pretty far from finished. As soon as I get into something where I feel like it's working, I want to jump to something else. The reason for this is because I try to get 2 or 3 different versions that I'm like, oh, this could work. So as soon as something feels like it's working a little bit, I want to move to something else. And I'm going to do the inverse with this one, where I'm going to move from, since I'm doing this red, fiery background, the light that's breaking across is going to be a cool light. And I'm just moving this as quickly as possible from oranges into reds. And I know I could just put a gradient on this and be done with it, or use a soft brush. But I've really been leaning into this whole thing of painting opaquely. Which, I mean, it would still be painting opaque if I were using a soft brush. But when I mean painting opaquely, as opposed to using low opacity, like painting or drawing with like a 10% airbrush or 20% airbrush and building up color, like picking a color, and that's the color I paint with. And if I want a lighter color, instead of doing a lower opacity, just picking a lighter color. And I will tell you that, see, the problem with doing a bright red background is, to me, it always feels like a cheat. Because this hellscape, hellish color scheme. Oh, Paul's got to take off. He says, got to go for a run. Thanks for sharing your bad art. It's really good. Well, that's kind of you to say. Thank you. And thanks for stopping by. Always good to see you. And I'm glad you're getting some exercise. That's something I talk about on this channel, is that we got to take care of our bodies as well as our minds. So getting exercise and staying healthy is very important to the creative life. Let's see here. Let me jump back up to the chat. By the way, this stream is going by really quick. I didn't even notice that we're like 48 minutes in. Let's see here. Omar in the chat says Pinterest is better for reference. Yeah, James said I use Google for most reference stuff. Pinterest, I have found good stuff in Pinterest, and I've created Pinterest boards, but more often than not, when I am working on a piece, what I do instead is I will just grab all of the images I can find and just put them in a single document. Kind of like, what was I doing? Last week when I was working on creatures, I'll just create a document full of just images that are useful to me. Throw those in, and then just have that to look at. Let's see here. James says, all right, I like making lists. It's a good way to narrow stuff down. Let's see here. Byron says, not sure if Pinterest would have that kind of reference. They don't even allow nudity. That is interesting. I did not know that. Well, I mean, surgery sounds like something that would probably be okay. But again, I don't know. It's worth dabbling with. Now, here's the interesting thing. I'm looking at this, and I want to move into cooler colors. now. So it's, it was a very warm reds at the bottom. And let's say I want this to move towards purple. Problem is the gradual shift. Like when I move just out of red into magenta, magenta actually feels even warm. It feels warmer, and I don't want it to go that warm. So maybe I need to desaturate as well. Not necessarily darker, but desaturated. See, that's the thing. I don't want to go darker. I just want to go cooler. Just a little bit cooler. Let's see here. James says that red is really eye-catching. Thank you. He says, I'll take a look at Pinterest. And he says, okay, like a mood board. Yeah, I don't know if you saw last week's live stream, but I'm going to flip back out here and I'm going to go to... So these are some studies for a new comic, a monster that's in a new comic that I'm working on. And this is just for a creature study. I grabbed images of like eels, moray eels, spiders, squid, flying fish, jellyfish. I was trying to get something that was kind of creepy looking. And then, so this board is completely separate. Then what I did was I made a flattened copy of this board and I pasted it into one corner of a document where I'm doing thumbnails. So I would just have that. I know that you can just work with either a separate screen or have it off to the side, or you can do a split screen on an iPad so I can have the document on the left hand and then my drawings on the right. But having it here in the document and just working on one screen, so far that seems to be the most naturalistic way that I work. And the other thing that I think I've shown this before, what I like to do is, let me turn these off for a second. What I like to do is I start with a page of thumbnails, and I will take those thumbnails. It's like my first pass. And then what I will do is I will shrink them down so that they're in a corner of a page. So this is what was the last full page thing. I will shrink that down into the corner, and then I will draw more thumbnails around that. Then I will take this whole page and I will shrink that down into a corner. And you can basically see what I'm doing here, which is I keep drawing stuff and then shrinking things down, adding more. And then once I decided this was the point where I said, hey, let me put my reference in the document. So then instead of shrinking things down and putting them in the upper right, I switched to shrinking them down and putting them in the lower left. So now all that was filling up the page before is down here in this corner. And if you zoom in, it's like I can see all those tiny little thumbnails there. And sort of like it gives me visual reference, kind of like leading myself mental breadcrumbs in terms of what are the shapes. This is something I specifically use for thumbnailing. I mean, for like silhouettes and roughly designing characters. I wouldn't use this for like laying out a comic book page, but for this process, in terms of trying to figure out how I want a character to look, the fact that I can see these tiny little sketches in the corner of shapes that I've tried before, it'll either make me say, oh, wait, maybe if I take a piece from here and a piece from there and put them together, or I may just start sketching something and say, no, that's too similar to something I already did. Let me try it differently. So it allows me to just sort of see my evolution in a microcosm on one sheet with my mood board. So yes, that's how I'm integrating mood boards into my process. And now I'm going to go back to... Here we go. Color thumbnails. Let's see here. James says, I'm mainly interested in facial stuff at this point. Well, you know what's interesting? I think that you should follow whatever your instincts say. But if you're looking at deformities, maybe that's an idea. Like, I don't know why I'm stuck on the internal organ thing. Maybe it's just because it was the first idea that popped into my mind. So take it with a grain of salt. It's not the be-all, end-all of ideas. But if you're looking at deformities, maybe looking at things that are not faces and then trying to make faces out of them. You know, like what would happen if you were looking at a picture of like a somebody who had liver cancer and you were looking at a picture of their liver and you had to turn that deformed or tumor-ridden liver into a face. That's going to look real weird. And I'm bringing up that approach in the idea of it's not necessarily organs, whatever your reference is, whether you're looking at thalidomide babies or you're looking at, I don't know, something completely different, sand creature, I don't know, sea creatures or something weird that is not a face, and then trying to make a face out of it. Like I don't know if you've ever seen those exercises where you take like blobs of color or paint or looking at clouds and you try to draw something out of it, trying to make a face out of it or a creature out of it. That the idea of taking something that has the feeling of deformity you want, but isn't a face, and then constructing a face out of it. So it's taking the abstract and transforming it into something concrete. It's a weird approach, and I'll tell you, the first couple that you try, you're gonna be like, I don't know about this. I'm saying it may not be the be-all end-all, but maybe try at least like 5 or 6 sketches with that approach and see if by the time you get a little bit further into it, if you don't find a spark of something that's useful. And if not, then you still got a bunch of reference to try. But that might be a counterintuitive way to develop faces and a counterintuitive way to use reference. All right. So anyway, back to the red here. Now, like I was saying, the challenge I have is that I feel like it's a cheat. You can just take almost anything and make it red and black, and it's going to feel like a strong color palette. I'm just going to go to a purple and see how that looks. And to me, it looks like it's too strong of a jump. The challenge that I'm having here is I want it to feel like it's gradually coming out of the red. Let me desaturate this. Let's see here. James says, right. I was playing with abstract forms a bit, even though football would be something to go off of. Yeah, there was a cartoon that used to be on Nickelodeon called Hey Arnold, and the main character's head was shaped like a football. And they even would, one of the characters even tease him and call him Football Head. Little known fact, I was an intern on that show when I was in college. Funnest job I never got paid for. Like if I didn't need to make money, I would happily have just continued going into the office for free. It was a very, very fun gig, very fun working environment. Yeah. James says fun show. Yeah, it was as fun to help make or assist the people making it as it was to watch. I almost feel like I should stop trying to work these cool colors into the sky at the top. It feels more to me like I'm just wrecking what's working. Let's turn off that for a minute. Go back to the bright red. Whoa, too much. I should probably lock the main layer so I don't accidentally draw on it. Instead, I'm going to put these colors in the shadow of the sky. And even that, I might just be like, you know what? Yeah, it's all right. I need to leave that alone. The warm reds at the bottom are working. I need to leave the cools at the top alone. Need to move from reds. Let's see, a really pale purple. That might be too pale. And the way this is kind of designed, it's like all of these characters are kind of getting a rim light from the environment, but at the same time, there's a secondary, I guess, soft glow coming from the front of the figures. Well, I mean, it's not really a soft glow. It's coming from the light that's breaking across. And the other thing to play with is the fact that the rest of these are all going to be statues. The only one that's going to be flesh and blood is Medusa. So this is almost like moonlight raking across them. And just so you guys know, we're a little bit past an hour. I'm going to wrap up in a few minutes. I think I'm just going to push this a little bit further along and see where it takes me before calling it a wrap. What's interesting is the transition that I'm having to make as I get to the top, where I have to decide, do I want those pillars and this frame that's around them, do I want to be part of the red color of the environment or the cool color of the figures? I think that I like the way it looks with switch back to red here. I think I like the way it looks with the red ending at the pillars. And having that frame at the top be more of the environmental colors. And also, let me come along here and give this a little bit of a rim light, or a rim dark, rather. Now, one of the things I might have to do is do a version where I completely change the value structure. And the reason why I would do that is because I'm curious what it would look like if I have a version where it really is just like all these feel like marble statues, and it's all just like white and gray with just her getting a little bit of color. And I'm wondering what to do. Because this is already purple. And I've seen that the magenta kind of fights a little bit. What happens if I make this pale and dark? Make this a little bit more of the environment color. Maybe have some of this here in the foreground. Now, what bothers me is that I'm not using a particular logic here. I'm just sort of putting colors intuitively. And I think that's what a lot of my work is missing, is color logic. I mean, I'm playing with warms against cools, saturated against desaturated, and those are all very valid ways to work a piece, but I'm not applying them consistently. All right. Well, this is interesting, but it's not a slam dunk. And that's the reason why I do thumbnails, is because you got to work your way through a process. I mean, so far, fiery red skies, which I've used that before. I know it's a go-to. I know it works. It's just a matter of making the figures play well with that. This could work. The cool pale sky could also work. And I think what I'm going to do is sort of spin out from these two and just see if I can find what it would take to get these two ideas to a place where one of them is a strong front runner. This idea really works, really looks good. See, here's the thing. This one feels like it's in the direction of the color of a lot of my pieces, and it is good to have a consistency in terms of your palette. People recognize sort of the way in which a certain artist uses color. That's a positive. But also, I want to challenge myself and not repeat myself, try to use color in new and better ways, which leads me to fight against what are my natural instincts. Aside from the fact that this piece is still not completely thought out color-wise. So, but yeah. All right, guys. Again, we're going to, we'll come back to this probably next week. I don't know if we'll even have time to work on it. If I have time to draw during the week, it's probably going to be working on more character design. So we may continue this for a few weeks, where I may jump back and forth between this and thumbnails while I'm trying to hash out the writing for the next comic. But in the meantime, if anyone's a Patreon subscriber, I posted the replay for this past week's art book study group. So you guys can definitely go check that out. And I also reposted it in our Discord server. So if you guys would like to become a Patreon subscriber, there are hundreds of hours of art book study group videos, which are deep dives. They're less about my personal work and more about the studies that I go through to kind of improve my craft. We've been doing a long-running series on a book called Walt Reed's The Figure. We also have some early videos on Bridgman, a few other different art books that I've looked at, and it's just doing studies from those books, trying to suck at all the knowledge we can. So head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. As little as $2 a month gets you access to the art book study group library. You're also able to read all my comic books on an online digital archive, and you get access to a Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share artwork, feedback, tips, process, general shop talk, and more. Head on over and become a subscriber. If you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, work in progress animated GIFs, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you like to purchase physical copies of my comics, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. I'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can read books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a standalone psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can also pick up my most recent project, Morning Star. It is a retelling of Lucifer's Fall from Heaven as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter. There's photo reference, script excerpts, thumbnails, page layouts, and more. I basically show you how I put the entire comic book together. So check all that out at amazon.jeremy.net. There's links in the description for the video. And if you're watching on Twitch, there are links in the About Me tab. I always forget to tell you guys, hit that like button, hit that share button. If there's somebody you think would enjoy these videos, please forward them to them. Help spread the word. I greatly appreciate it. And I appreciate you guys hanging out with me while I'm sitting here making artwork and talking with you guys. Byron says thanks for the stream as always. Glad I could catch it again. Always a pleasure hanging out with you, man. Thanks for stopping by. All right, guys, that's it for now. Go be creative.